Hello, Comic-Con. We have a really talented, amazing panel, as you could see, and I don't want to waste any time. Let's just get into it. So, Katie, since you're right here, let's start with you. I'd love to talk about Do Revenge, right? When I saw the title, I was like, ooh, and then I saw the film, and it's like, that classic 90s, right? The 2000s feel to it. How did you come up with the various hairstyles throughout the film? And were there any films in particular that like inspired you or influenced you with the looks that you ended up creating?
Well, our cast was, of course, a huge inspiration for their characters. They came in with a lot of ideas. Clueless was a very strong reference for this film. 10 Things I Hate About You. Empire Records was a favorite of mine from the 90s that also influenced some of the characters. But Drea's character, I thought, had a really strong Clueless vibe, and Camila came in with a lot of ideas, and we pulled a lot of references both from original 90s styles as well as people who have recreated them with the current new aesthetic that people have found. And for Maya's character, it was scripted that she had this makeover transformation. It was scripted as a blonde bob. So I came in with some references, but in our conversations, her mom, Uma, came up, who was a great also 90s reference. And then Taylor Swift, she's a big fan of Taylor Swift too. So those were our references for her hair color.
Oh, yep. So fun. Okay, so I love those references. Doug, Orphan, we all know it, love it. It's been 13 years since the first one came out, right? And then we see Esther Furman Isabel Furman returned to play Esther in Orphan First Kill. That's not a small amount of time, right? No. So, my goodness, she's playing a young child again. It's the same ruse as before. How did you pull off the transformation so that it was both believable and realistic, despite that amount of time?
It required a lot of thought. I got involved, months before. I think even the show was greenlit, and we started doing what we call proof of concept tests, not on Isabel, but on a model, just to see if it was even feasible to take somebody who was in their mid-20s and make them look like they were even like 12. So we did a lot of different tests, and I built prosthetics and dentures and all kinds of things, and and used lighting and different camera angles to try and give the effect that this was a little kid. Once that idea was kind of passed by the above the line people, then we started testing on Isabel, who was just amazing to work with, and she had great ideas, and I ended up doing just very it's hard to tell in the film, but heavy kind of highlight and shadow makeup, and we used contact lenses to make her eyes look, little kids look like they have big eyes because their eyes are full grown, not full grown, their eyes are adult size when they're born. So we use contact lenses to make her eyes look bigger, dentures, and that's how we did it. And then, camera angles and all that, just to make her look as youthful as possible.
I love it. So that movie magic.
Yes.
Literally.
Yeah.
So, okay, speaking of transformation, Katie, I want to come back to you for a second and talk about a friend of the family, right? Because Colin Hanks is almost unrecognizable. I practically didn't recognize him even in that clip, right? And of course, you're also basing this on someone who actually exists, Bob Broberg. So, what did you have to keep in mind as you approached that transformation? So especially since you were basing it on someone that actually already exists. Like, what did you do in relation to like replicating the hairstyle? What things did you want to keep, in relation to the real person? And then what things did you kind of, curate directly to Colin?
Yeah. My first question with a transformation like this is always, is it necessary? I don't ever want our work to distract from the story and the message that's trying to be sent through the story. And with Bob Broberg's story, it felt really important to accurately portray him, just because there was a documentary that had come out previous to this series that a lot of people had seen, and Bob is in that documentary, and he's very memorable. So it felt important to me, and then luckily when I met with our showrunner, Nick Antosca, he felt the same and was fully supportive of us pursuing this transformation, and thank goodness Colin was, was on board with this, and he was incredible the whole way through. So the next question is, how do we do this in a way that we can film it through the summer in Atlanta, Georgia, on somebody who's wearing a lot of polyester? Just how do we make it possible and make sure that it looks good, hyper-realistic, and not distracting? And so my goal was to avoid putting him in a bald cap. And so when I went to talk to him about it, I presented some of the options, one of which was shaving the top of his head and using the back and sides of his own hair, and putting a lace topper on top of his head. And it was, to me, it was just the best choice for it to look as good as possible and withstand our shooting days, and also keep it efficient in the morning. And the man said yes. I couldn't believe it. And even beyond that, when I had to approach this conversation, he was actually in his costume fitting, and he was wearing his Mormon underwear at the time, and he was all on board. It was just an incredible moment for me. But yeah, so it was a whole process of lightening his hair, keeping his head shaved, and then our incredible makeup department would cover the dark shadow left from his hair in the morning before I would go back in and put his lace piece on top.
Whoa.
It
Yeah.
looked amazing.
Amazing job.
Thank
Amazing
you.
for you to like actually ask the question, and kudos to Colin.
Oh
being
my
like,
God.
I'm on board.
Yes. And he kept me laughing the whole way through too. Like, I thought I was ready to emotionally support him through the process, and he had me laughing. So it couldn't have been a better experience.
That is fantastic. Well, Allison, I want to kick a question down to you, because as we saw, you worked with the Clerks franchise, right? I mean, amazing, fun. This has been around since 1994, and you come in for the recent installment of Clerks 3. And so you're dealing with characters that people know and love and have been knowing for a minute at this point, right? What research did you have to do to ensure that the costumes were going to still make sense with the rest of the films?
Well, I mean, I think that, of course, I watched all of the Clerks films that existed before Clerks 3, Clerks and Clerks 2, but when you do a Kevin Smith film, you're designing like for the View Askew universe that he's created, which is like everything he's ever done. So like TV, film, comic books, cosplay, like they do Comic-Cons all the time. So I think that, you know, I did a lot of research on like the black and white films, like the stills of Clerks, which was in black and white, but that was quite grainy. So he brought back a lot of the same like day players, like his friends and family from Leonardo, New Jersey, that were just like walk-on roles in Clerks are like important members of the franchise now. So sometimes it was like me calling Brian O'Halloran, who plays Dante, and being like, you know, you wear this sweater, this is, you know, 30 years ago, you wore this sweater, it's like an 80s Argyle knit, like what happened to it, like where is it, you know? And like he had a story, he was like, well, it was my girlfriend's sweater at the time, it was like a Liz Sport sweater, and it doesn't exist anymore, it got destroyed during filming, and so like that was something I had to make, but I had this great collaboration with the cast because they were existing in the franchise before, and they were really excited to work with me. And I think that the art of parody is something I learned at Saturday Night Live when I was part of the design team there too. It's like you have to fully replicate something so that the audience doesn't see any holes. Like they just see it as what it's meant to be in the designer's eyes. And I think I really brought that sensibility with me when I did Clerks 3.
It's amazing. Liz Sport. Wow, I forgot that
Very
existed for a
specific.
second. I love it. Well, Amanda, I have a question for you about pleasure, right? Because it tackled a lot of topics that typically isn't represented in mainstream media, and specifically the adult film industry, right? So what was the approach to costumes in relation to that, especially since they played such an important role in communicating the journey of the main character throughout the film?
Yeah, thank you. For Bella, she's this Swedish teenager who's traveled from Sweden to LA for the first time to kind of pursue her dream. And in terms of like her various like adult film performances, we were lucky to have a lot of professionals from the industry to consult on the film and help guide me in the specifics of each genre of performance, because they're really super specific. And I was really surprised to actually find that each genre, there's limited color palette and hairstyles and like fabric choices that you wouldn't use in, say, other genres of the performance. And so it was really helpful to have their guidance in helping me really kind of hone in on the authenticity of the industry, because that was important. And then for her character arc, being kind of a teenager coming to the States for the first time, and actually our lead actress, Sophia, that was her first acting role and her first time in LA as well. And so I wanted to really highlight kind of the innocence and also the excitement of a young woman actually embarking on a new chapter of her life, because it's exciting, and there's something pure about that, And so with her kind of casual looks, I wanted to be playful and fun and kind of bring out the more masculine side of her character, which also kind of was fed by our lead actress, like her own personality to the role as well. And then as we kind of go through her journey with her, the playfulness is like slowly kind of stripped, and kind of at the end I wanted to show how her personal style and her professional life are kind of like merging, and in the end her personal style kind of almost becomes performative, just like her costumes in certain performances, if that makes sense.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's really meta. I like that. Okay, well, ooh, layers on top of layers. Okay, so speaking of layers on top of layers, Laura. I got a question for you. It's like you designed some looks for the big Subwoofer music video with Snoop Dogg, right? And it's featuring Mount Westmore, and there's like this beautiful sci-fi driven like element. What was your inspiration for these looks? Like, where did some of that come from, and what was your process in creating them?
It was co-directed by these two directors. One was Sam Macaroni, one was Jesse Wellens, and they wanted to create basically a love letter to like sci-fi films. So it was like a big old like bucket of like sci-fi references mixed all around with like the Snoop Dogg Mount Westmore touch. And I was like, it was cool because I've heard that Snoop Dogg is pretty down for anything in terms of like vibe, and I was like, okay, what about Ice Cube, Too Short, E40, like these legendary like West Coast rappers that I was like, oh my god, like this is crazy. I'm gonna make this guy be like a hip hop Lando Calrissian. But I was taking those references and like putting kind of merging two worlds. Like one, like you have really iconic worlds, like obviously we pulled references from Star Wars and then Total Recall and things like that. And then how do we integrate it with these people? Because it's not like normally in a film you're dealing with like you know, maybe this narrative build versus this was like you're incorporating who these people are. And so we kind of, in my head, I almost created like, oh, what's the archetype of each person and how to like balance that. And obviously, like Snoop Dogg was like, I want to be the Mandalorian. And so when we were like coming up with the design of it, we didn't obviously want it to just be like, oh, this is like a Boba Fett thing. We wanted to like, what is like his images, so that's why we incorporated like his iconic like SD. We made like the helmet had a marijuana leaf kind of like cut into the shape of the helmet, and you know, 213 is like the Long Beach area code, which obviously he's based out of, and it does a lot of charity work and things like that with. And the colors are inspired by the Lakers because he's a huge fan, and he also had a close relationship with Kobe Bryant. So it's like wanted to mesh all these things that really, it was actually a very like personal interpretation of something that's very recognizable. And then, you know, so it's the same thing for like the other people and how we decided to like execute it and bring it all together. But that was a lot of fun, yeah.
Oh my God. I love the details within that, and how personal everything was. And so, okay, we also saw in your clip League of Legends, right? Like, and the Cassante. So you recently designed, the Cassante build for the video game League of Legends. So what can you tell us, going from something so personal, right, with like Snoop Dogg, and it's so like getting keen to the person that he is, and then you're doing a character from a video game, right? Like, what is that process to bring that type of character to life?
I feel like, you know, so many people here have talked about the power of collaboration and how integral that is as an artist when you're working with other people, especially when it's something as intimate as makeup, hair, or costume. And Daobia, who's the voice actor for the character within the video game, we had a lot of really thoughtful conversations because this was the first Black gay character, like from the offshoot. It wasn't like retconned or retroactively assigned, that League of Legends was putting out there. And so it was really important that this character was true. And for me, I was like, I didn't want it to be a one-to-one. I didn't want it to, like, I cut my teeth in cosplay as a kid. So being at conventions, I understand the passion of like, of video games and anime and graphic novels and all these things and comic books. But when you're doing it for, like, so it's like balancing how you want to translate something that's otherworldly, but also bring it to a grounded reality where you're also trying to represent something. And that's a balance that you have to do. And so we made sure that we took the design, but then we, you know, there's research of like batik wax print that was done, which is a West African, you know, particularly in like Ghana, in terms of like textile techniques that were incorporated. Or I had conversations with Daobia, who's Nigerian, and being like, okay, I don't want it to just be like this is a amorphously African thing, you know. It's like you have to be incredibly conscientious of your choices. And so a lot of really thoughtful conversations, and that, so in executing it, talking to him was incredibly pivotal, and then doing research and working with the team. And they were really nice to be like, they were very open about my interpretation of the character, which was, you know, you don't always get that. And so they were lovely to work with and open to all of the ways we were going about the design.
Oh, it's beautiful. I love that collaborative effort. And Angran, we're so happy that you're on the panel because, okay, you know, it's like you're in production design, and so that's not necessarily creating the characters', you know, looks and clothes, but you are integral to that personality, right, and the story that they're going to inhabit in the scene. So give us some insight into your process when it comes to designing a character's space and collaborating with other departments so that you can really create a world for them to inhabit.
I'm really happy to be here, and it's very, thank you. is very amazed to hear like every designers here from like designing their costume and makeups and how they interact with each characters. To me, production design is we bring the dialogue from the script into like a space and environment. And to me, in my mind, we have like a big color palette throughout the entire film, from the first second up towards the last minute. And every single set and environment, we also have individual color palette that has to speak up the meaning of the space. And to me personally, I really love to share like early on of some rough ideas to the costume designers and sometimes with DPs, because the early we do those rough ideas of talking about, what about the social classes of each character? Is this some type of the space or items they would buy on their daily basis? Is this from their parents? Do they have like a intimacy feelings of these side deck items? It's very a big improvement at the end to elevate the entire stories. So I intend to like share ideas with my costume designers very early, and we share our color palette. And so if they're choosing to use certain colors or fabric or textiles, I would either repeat if we think that's accurate, or we will just go the other opposite side. So we shine each other in when they go into different spaces. And to me, I would say each set, the set deck were more like outfits, and then the props more like a jewelry, if you're thinking about costumes.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so then this is something I want to kind of throw out to the panel in general, and I'm going to pick you, but anyone else that's feeling compelled and wants to jump in, because some of you have kind of talked about this a little bit already. But when it comes to that process of, like crafting a character, what is the first thing that you think about? Like, what is the first part of your process with that? I know, Katie, you spoke this a little bit, but Ali, I would like to.
I mean, what you said is so true. I'm very story-driven, and that allows me to kind of get inside the character and like the psychology of what it is we're making. And I think that opens up all this whole world of what would this character wear, like where would they shop, what's their job, how did they grow up, like environmentally, where are they from, or geographically. Collaborating with the production designer is so important, and the DP and the director. But I think like for Elias in Clerks 3, for that character process, that was very much like, he starts as this Christian Jesus freak, and then he becomes like this edgelord Satan worshiper, right? And to me, like, how is that translatable in this character's life? Like, where is he pulling those items from? And I think I saw that as an opportunity to incorporate his experiences with cinema, because he's working on Randall's film in Clerks 3, and he has become a filmmaker. So he's seeing things in his childhood that he's then putting on, like maybe he saw Rocky Horror Picture Show, or Blade Runner, or Bram Stoker's Dracula, and he was like, I can pull this from my mother's closet, this black lace dress, and make it into a look that's his own. So I think making sure it makes sense on camera is very important. That specifically was meant to be a pop and very graphic, but you don't want costumes to distract from the story. We should really just be supporting the character and giving them the space to be creative and do with it what they'd like.
Anyone else? Amanda, what about for you? I know you shared a little bit of that journey with the character and pleasure in particular, but in general, do you have a place where you kind of start with your process?
I agree with a lot that you just said. I guess for me, I'm pretty intuitive. So usually at the very, very beginning, when I'm just reading the script, I honestly kind of let colors and music come to me, and then kind of lead me down a path of looking at art and photography to start. But then once I feel like I landed somewhere, I'm usually that person who's like pestering the writer for like backstories of the characters. I really like to go way back. like for instance on Emily the Criminal, it was really important to me, and actually was a godsend that writer-director John Patton Ford actually wrote like mini stories on like, you know, their childhood, and like, because for instance with, we only see like 3 scenes with Emily and her best friend Liz in the film, and those scenes are really short. But I felt like they were so short, I needed to really show with their costumes just the evolution of their friendship, and also the socioeconomic divide between them, and like where that started. And so it was really important and really helpful to read John's backstories, like little essays on their upbringing and history, and like where that friendship started, and you know how it kind of deviated into like two different paths. And the key there, you know, for them is that Liz went to grad school and didn't have any student debt, whereas Emily did. And that was enough to really like set the 2 best friends kind of on two very different trajectories. And that was kind of the key for me in designing the costumes.
Amazing. Oh my God. I'm like, what is it like to have no student debt? I can't even imagine. Okay, so Angran, I'm going to kick another question to you, because you know, you recently dealt with a mythological creature that, I mean, is very well storied, and the Nian, right, for Hulu's bite-sized Halloween anthology series. And so when you're taking a character like that, a creature like that, and bringing it to life, what was it like within this project to, you know, actually bring it to life in the production? What were some of the things you had to keep in mind with that particular character?
I would say to bring Nian to life is really challenging, because it's like a Chinese mythological beast, and then we're kind of wanted to become a human form. So actually, my costume designer reached out to me before I even picture the whole thing yet, and she showed me some of the sketches, and then told me some of her concerns. And then by the time I had a conversation with my director already, we kind of had a Google sheet that listed, we break it down every story beats of the entire script, and then we were communicating and saying what kind of feeling we want to show at this first second or minute, and then what kind of feeling is the middle part, and then the last portion. And then there's like a conversation between me, director, and my DP saying when is the realistic time, when is the surrealist time, and then when are we mixing them, and then how we're going to create that. At the same time, we don't want it just be a Chinese look, because we have a actress who's like a really amazing Buto dancer, so her performance and her look is very Japanese style. But then when you merge and then trying to say no, we want this to be very Chinese, it's gonna be really off. So we kind of wanted to blend into like more like an Asian culture, because when my costume designer showed me a look of a full, like a very flowy white costume, I was like, that in Chinese is kind of snake, and then in Korea could be like a fox. So we were like, well, is this specific color or simple color really represent our Nian? And then we were like, you know what, let's just make it Asian, because it's gonna play on Hulu. So I think it has a lot to do early on with all departments to talk together, and then we're thinking about the audience too, like where it's gonna play and what kind of effect we want to bring at the end. So I think it's all together. Not just always coming from one direction. And I'm very appreciative, my director is very open-minded, so she take all of our ideas and trying to assemble into one. I think in my mind, like the great stories is always like the best collaborations.
love that. Yes. And to have a director that's like, yes, we want to actually like have this be a group effort. And so speaking of tradition, Doug, you're doing a twist on tradition with us this year, Violent Night. My husband is very excited about this because he loves a good bloody Christmas.
Who doesn't?
All right. And so it just opened yesterday, right? And so this is a new take on the Christmas film, y'all. And Doug, you know, as the prosthetic makeup designer, what can you tell us about your role in the film and in relation to what we're going to see on screen when we see it?
It was quite a challenging film to work on, mainly because I was on a film right before that, and I could only be involved in a few of the production meetings to figure out what we were going to see, and a lot of the effects were driven by the stunts. So there was a lot of discussion with our stunt coordinator as well as the director. And basically, though, I got a lot of what we were going to do from the makeup department head who was involved with a lot of the meetings, because I basically had to finish a show on a Friday, take my stuff, put it in the trailer for Violent Night, and then start on Monday while I was trying to build all this stuff. And then it was just kind of the stunt coordinator would say, I think we're going to do this to this guy. And I'd go, okay, and I'd go away and build it. And so some of it was in the script and some of it wasn't. So I was constantly on my toes the whole show as well. And then I looked after doing all of David's blood as well.
That sounds really cool.
It was.
That sounds like a good time.
It was a very challenging show to work on, but very gratifying, yeah.
Blood's always a collaboration between departments, too.
Totally,
Yeah.
yeah. Between costume, hair, makeup.
Often it comes from makeup and then, like, what color blood are we using?
Yeah.
And then where is it
Where are
coming
we getting
from?
it from? Or are you making it? Or am
Yes.
I, yeah.
Like, can I borrow some of your blood to paint it on this costume?
Exactly,
Yes.
yeah.
I know people don't realize how much goes into blood, right? Because
Yes.
if you pick the wrong color at the wrong time, you'd be like, well, that doesn't look like you got
Doesn't
stabbed
look
in the
real.
Or
liver.
people
Right.
are using different blood.
Right.
even, yeah.
Right, and then you got to have the continuity of the blood, and that's a whole other conversation.
And
Oh, yeah.
some blood stains hair.
Yeah.
Oh,
Just saying.
that's
No.
a real conversation. Okay.
But that's the other important thing about when you're crafting characters for film, is that all of us have to work together to come up with a look. Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so I didn't start with this, but everybody has an origin story, right? Like you didn't just fall into what you do now. So let me just kind of, if you can, go back in time, a little bit, and think about what it was that inspired you to look at this particular field of expertise. Was there a particular character or a film or TV show that inspired you to actually, become your profession? And Katie, I'll start with you.
I remember this one distinctly, actually. I first saw The Elephant Man, David Lynch's film, when I was, I think, 7 or something like that. And I first remember being so moved by the story. And then I remember asking my mom more about it, and she told me this is based on the story of a real person who had a disease that made him look this way. And then I told her that I felt so bad that somebody with that disease had to play that role and be treated that way. And she's like, Katie, that's not somebody with that disease, that's an actor, and he's wearing makeup. And the rest is history. Like, that film just did it for me.
I love that. Amanda, what about you?
I actually my parents were big film buffs, and we used to just watch movies all the time at home, and I would sit and copy what I'm seeing on the TV. But I remember the first time I saw Bram Stoker's Dracula, I just could not draw. I was just mesmerized, couldn't take my eyes off the screen. I just remember seeing Dracula's the bloody musculature armor, and just didn't understand what it was. It wasn't clothing. I was like, what is that? It almost looks like real, like wet and bloodied, and I was just blown away. And I feel like that was the first time I realized, not even understanding what costumes was, but I realized like that was something that could like really kind of move an audience, and like kind of also like move the story along without dialogue, without really anything happening, but just with the look itself. Yeah, that was my
Laura, what was yours?
Similarly to Amanda, my parents were big film buffs, specifically of classic films, and so I had an affinity for movies like The Women, or like Philadelphia Story, like classic movies that have fabulous fashion. But I also grew up in an incredibly creative household where like I said, I'm a huge nerd. I grew up playing video games. I read manga. I watched anime. And so I taught myself sewing via cosplay. And this was back when, there was like, you can't buy everything on Amazon. And so you had to do a lot of your stuff yourself. You're like trying to make a very specific shade of color for a synthetic wig. And so you're like breaking Sharpies, mixing it with alcohol on the bottom, and be like, well, let's see what happens. And so, so I did that in like from when I was like a preteen until my like late teenage years. And then I was like, I guess that's it. This is just a hobby. And my husband actually was the one he was like, you could do this professionally. And I was like, I was aware of that because like I like Sleepy Hollow or like Phantom Menace. Those are like movies I feel like that left big impressions, but I didn't know. And so eventually I made the path towards pursuing it professionally. So it was kind of like this nerdy side that collabed with this like film nerd side. And then I was like, oh, you can do this like as a living. It's pretty incredible. I think it's miraculous we get to do something that like this, and be able to get our food and cover our rent and stuff. So,
Yes. Doug, what's yours?
I just love movies since I was a little kid, and I loved, fantasy and horror movies. But I think I'm much older than everybody here, so my movies that I liked were the old Universal classic monsters, like the Frankenstein monster and the Wolfman, and then when they first showed the original Planet of the Apes on TV in 1970, I don't know. I watched it, and that was it. I was completely and utterly blown away, and built a makeup kit, and that was it. But of course, I from Canada. They didn't make movies where I came from, so when I was little, I thought, okay, I'll either never do this, or I'm gonna have to move to Los Angeles to pursue my dream. But luckily, the movies came to where I lived, so I didn't have to move. I didn't have to move here, which would have been awesome, just in case.
But you manifested them.
I did. I'm very lucky. I think we're all lucky here that we had a dream and we got to live it.
Wonderful. Angran, what about you?
I mean, I think for me, 2 times are all behind of the scenes. It's like there was one day I was searching some like movie clips, and then behind the scene of Titanic what popped up, and then I was like, what is that boat doing in a water tank? And then I was like, why are these people are bigger than this boat? So I was like, oh, there's actually someone made extra boat of this entire ship. And I was like, oh, that's how they shot it. And then the second time was I found out Hogwarts as a miniature. I was like, wow, these are huge, like Harry Potter, like Hogwarts, like they're like people are painting on a ladder. So I was like, wow, those are like, there's like a really talented department is like building this entire world. So I was like, I need to figure out how to become a part of them. So it was pretty awesome, shocking. When I look at behind the scenes.
Oh, I love that. Okay, Allison.
I think I'm from Philadelphia, and I grew up very artistic. Like, my mother always put me in art classes. My grandmother was a professional tailor. She worked in factories in Philly. So I think I always really liked art classes and thrifting, like sourcing and finding weird things in random thrift stores and making it into something else. And that was just something that we did in my family. And I think then I went to college in New York. I went to Parsons, and I became friends with a lot of filmmakers, coincidentally, who went to Tisch. And they were making thesis films. You know, they were like 20 years old, using these cameras they used on the side of planes in World War II. Like, they had all this access to these crazy equipment. And someone said to me, they were like, oh, do you want to be in the film, and do you want to be the costume designer? And I was like, I have no idea what that is. But we shot in black and white, and I used my love of vintage and thrifting to kind of put my mark on that film. And then I just loved it. I loved being on set and collaborating, totally.
I love it. So all of you had this moment of wonder, of wonderment, that essentially opened you up to diving into this as a career. So I'm sure there's going to be some people who are watching and they're thinking about, how would I go about doing what they do, right? Like, how do I get into this? If you were in the elevator with them, you got one sentence, and you could just give them one sentence of advice, what would you say? Angran, I'm going to start with you and to just come on down the line.
One sentence? Wow. I would say you would have to be really passionate about what you do, something really driven you to, because it could be very intense of your daily life, but as long as you're passionate about it, you would have a lot of fun.
I love that. Laura?
Yeah, I think building off of what you said, I'm going to say perseverance for sure, because you're going to, even though you love what you do, you work on very difficult projects, and you have to, on your crappiest day, you got to be able, at the end of the day, you're like, I'm still going to continue with this. And so having that emotional fortitude is incredibly, like, I feel like it's necessary, you know, so.
And we have a lot of crappy days.
I think that in the beginning of your career, you should say yes very often, even if it's something maybe you don't want to see yourself, like a genre you don't see yourself doing in the long term. There's all these opportunities to learn and to problem solve. And I think try to have fun. Try not to take yourself too seriously.
Amanda?
Yeah, I think piggyback off of what you just said, I think if an opportunity comes up and it really terrifies you, it actually is probably a good thing to take on. I feel like there are so many times where I'm like, I don't know, I've not done this before, but that's when you make your start, make your mark. So
Leave that comfort zone.
yeah.
For makeup, if you have a passion for it, go out and buy some makeup and just start doing it as often as you can. If you don't know how to do something, now we have the internet. Go on YouTube, watch how things are done. And yeah, just don't give up.
Should you find volunteers? Like, should you find guinea
Sure,
pigs?
yeah, just practice on yourself, practice on friends, that's what I did. And if you have a passion for it, you'll find your way to doing it.
And Katie?
Well, for hair, you would usually need to start by getting a cosmetology license. So I would suggest doing that as soon as possible so you can get into doing what you actually want to do. And to echo what everyone else said, just say yes to everything you can do. Start on student films or indie films, and just get in there and get as much experience as you can.
Well, can I just add to that?
Yes.
And don't be afraid to fail.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's big,
Yeah.
right? Because you fail, that's how you learn, right? As long as you're
Exactly.
learning, nothing is wasted.
There's been so many jobs where I've taken them on and thought, how am I going to do this? I don't know how to do this. I've never done this. But you find a way. Yeah.
And it encourages like curiosity too. Like you may learn something, you may develop. It might even be better than you expected, and also like it may not work out, and that's okay because then you'll even be stronger moving forward. So definitely, that's excellent.
Exactly,
Yeah, excellent
yeah.
point. Yeah.
And say yes to whatever comes to you, and then make sure you make mistakes because you learn from them.
Oh, yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, this has been amazing. This is it for our panel, but thank you so much. Katie, Doug, Amanda, Allison, Laura, Angran. Oh, it is. You shared so much insight. You're so generous. And a big thank you to Impact 24 PR and LA Comic Con for putting this together and bringing us together.
Thank you.